Well, everybody, this is Gary. Today is Monday, May 18th, 2020. It is 4:16 p.m. Eastern Standard Time in the United States in Rochester, New York. And I got a request to do a video on how did I deal with social and work changes during my 20s and 30s. To understand what I went through during my 20s and 30s, I'm 54 now. You have to understand what happened when I was a child and a teenager. Um, I originally started having psychiatric problems, I believe, my early childhood around the age of 10 or 12. I was severely depressed. I was not very motivated to do anything. In most respects, my childhood was normal. I mean, my father raised 10 kids by himself because my mother had passed away when I was 8. And that may have been a contributing factor, I don't know. But I spent most of my teen years just watching television, being really depressed. I did graduate barely from high school with a diploma. Um, but when I was 18, my psychiatric problems were getting bad enough that I had to go see a psychiatrist. And since I wasn't 18, I didn't need my father's permission to do it. So I waited until I was 18 to seek out a psychiatrist and a therapist, which I did. Um, Eventually, it was determined that if I was going to do anything important in treating my mental illness, I would have to leave my father's house. I was 18, I was still dependent on him financially. So I was admitted into Rochester Psychiatric Center, which was the state hospital for New York State in Rochester at that time. Since then, that building has been closed. It was 16 stories high, and it was crowded with a lot of patients, about 1,000 patients, at least between 500 and 100, or 500 and 1,000 patients. And I was on the 10th floor with 50, 60 other men. We didn't have single rooms. We all lived in a dormitory style setting. So I was there 8 months. While I waited for going into a group home for young adults, I was over the age of 18, so I wasn't considered an adolescent anymore. I was considered a young adult, and I was going to move into a group home, which I eventually did do. The group home had people in it between like the ages of 18 and 25. There were 8 or 9 of us living in the group home. It was not a locked facility. It wasn't a hospital. We could come in and go as we pleased. Of course, there were rules we had to follow. We had to take our medications, stay away from drugs and alcohol, that kind of thing. And I actually didn't stay away from drugs and alcohol at that time. I was going out every weekend and drinking with some of my friends. I wasn't old enough to buy liquor, but my friends did help me buy liquor, and we did drink even when we were on medications. When I was in the group home, I was on, if I recall correctly, Thorazine with some other medications. I've been on since then. I've been on countless different types of medication, and Thorazine was a horrible drug. It causes severe akathisia and tardive dyskinesia, which is involuntary muscle movements in the body, everything from your arms and legs to your mouth. Um, and for me, it made me get an easier sunburn, and I almost died from being in the sun on Thorazine without a shirt on. It was like 80, 90 degrees outside. I almost died from heat stroke. Eventually, I was taken off Thorazine and put on another drug. I think it was Mellaril. But anyways, I went from a group home to what's called a supportive apartment program. When I was about 19, I had a roommate, 2 roommates in the apartment, and there were 2 bedrooms. Two of us shared a bedroom. The other one had his own bedroom, and I stayed there for a couple of years, and then decided to go off to college. Um, During the time I was getting ready for college, I was exercising. I was trying to take care of my personal hygiene, trying to act as normally as possible so I could be prepared to go to college and deal with the stresses that I would have to deal with once I was in college. So I applied to universities and colleges around the area. All the 4 year universities I applied to turned me down, and I got accepted by a community college in Fulton, Montgomery counties in New York State. It's simply called Fulton Montgomery Community College. I went there for 2.5 years. Eventually, did earn an associate's degree in liberal arts, and I did fairly well there. I had a C average. I wasn't a stellar student, um, but The biggest change with that particular college is it's not anywhere near Rochester, New York. I had to travel a couple hundred miles to go to college there and leave Rochester for a couple of years, 2.5 years. Um, and I coped the way all their college students cope with it. Drank, did drugs, um, marijuana, that kind of thing. Nothing heavy. I mean, I think I tried cocaine twice. Um, didn't do much for me, so I never did it again. Smoking a lot of marijuana, a lot of hash, and drinking a lot of alcohol. There were parties and things like that at the college dormitories. I was living in the dormitories because I wasn't from that area, so I couldn't live at home. For 2.5 years, the dorms were my home. And one of the stressful events of all of that is that I had to change roommates every semester or so, depending on who was graduating, who had finished their work, and who was coming new into the college. So I had to deal with all kinds of changes, including for the first time in my life, meeting a lot of people from other countries. I had one roommate who was a Muslim, nice guy from Turkey. Yeah, Turkey. I had a nice guy from Japan. I met a lot of people from Japan. There were a lot of Japanese students, very nice people, um, different races and different religions. Um, but particularly in this particular college at that particular time, there were a lot of Asian students from Japan and Korea and other places like that. Um, Became sexually active at college, wasn't sexually active before that. I didn't feel confident around women or girls at the time. So my confidence was built up during college and before college by lifting weights, taking better care of myself, other than using drugs and alcohol. I was jogging, I was lifting weights, I looked a lot better than I did when I was in my teens. In my teens, I had a really bad case of acne, and it, I still have the acne scars on my face from that. But I got rid of the acne with benzoyl peroxide and was doing better in college and stayed there until I graduated and got an associate's degree in liberal arts. By the time I was finished, I think I was 22, 23 years old. It was around 1987, 1988 when I finished. Um, then I went on to a 4 year university, SUNY Old Westbury in Long Island, New York. I was there for my third year of college, and in my fourth year of college, I met a girl that I was dating. She happened to be African American. Um, we found out she had HIV, and in around 1992, and chances are she had it before I met her because she didn't get it from me, and I don't have HIV today, luckily. I was never infected with it, but I dated this woman from my mid 20s to my mid 30s. I spent about 10 years taking care of somebody who had HIV/AIDS. Um, she started out with just being HIV positive, but eventually developed actual symptoms of AIDS. And so for 10 years, she would get sick, get better, get sick again. They would change her meds as new meds came along, and they did. And she survived for 10 years. So from the time I was like 24 to 34, I was dating her, taking care of her, living with her eventually. And I quit my fourth year of college to take care of her. So I never earned a bachelor's degree because I spent 10 years taking care of her. And of course, I was still having my own psychiatric problems, the stress of taking care of somebody who was seriously ill, had effects on my mental health, it drained my energy. I ended up going into another group home. I was no longer living with my girlfriend um, because of the stress of taking care of her was just too great. And I was going in and out of mental hospitals again during that time. So the main stress for me was her HIV, knowing that somebody I loved was eventually probably going to die. Um, and there was not much I can do to stop that from happening. I could only deal with her one day at a time as we went forward. Eventually, she did die on April 13th, 2001, a few days before the World Trade Center disaster happened, 9/11. She died from AIDS, complications due to AIDS. She was physically blind, By the time she died, she had an infection in her eyes that caused her to lose her sight. She went from about 140 pounds down to 80 pounds. She had lost a lot of weight. She was confused. She had AIDS dementia, where the AIDS virus attacks the brain, and she eventually passed away in the middle of the night. I regret that I wasn't there the night that she died. The nurse told me maybe I should stay overnight and stay with her, but I didn't want to accept the fact that she was dying, so I left the hospital and I called the next morning to find out how she was doing. They told me she had died overnight. So we did her funeral, we did her memorial service, and 10 years of taking care of her ended when she passed away. And I was about 34 when she died, and she was about 34 when she died. Um, from that point on, things got confusing. My life felt like it had collapsed when she died, and I was about 34, I think. I was having hallucinations, delusions, severe depression. Her death brought on more paranoia, more anxiety, more visual and auditory hallucinations. And I was in and out of the mental hospitals and constantly changing apartments, even became homeless for about a month during my early 30s after she had died, my mid 30s. Um, main changes that I had to deal with was I was off my meds sometimes, and I was losing my temper and yelling and screaming at people, um, not doing well mentally at all. Eventually, I got into a mental health program known as IPRT, which is, I believe it's individual psychiatric, intensive psychiatric therapeutic something or other. But I was in a day program where I was getting myself back together, getting myself off drugs because I was taking speed. I was ordering pills illegally online. I was taking drugs that I was getting online, everything from Valium to speed to diet pills to Ritalin. I was heavily addicted to stimulants, um, and eventually I had to stop taking those. And so throughout the early 2000s, I was in and out of mental hospitals, dealing with not taking my medication, constantly changing apartments because I was getting evicted all the time. The main change that I had was Arlene's death. That's a woman's name who died from AIDS. Um, main social and work changes I had to do is I wasn't capable of working. I did work for a little while as a home health aide, and I did that job pretty well. It was very stressful. I had experience taking care of somebody who was very sick, and so I kind of took that and went with it as a job. It was part-time work. I only did it for 2 or 3 years before my mental health got bad enough where I had to stop. But I spent a lot of time going in and out of group homes, in and out of supportive apartment programs. Supportive apartment programs are there where you live in an apartment with roommates and they have staff on site during the day to help you cope with different things that are going on. And eventually I got kicked out of some of those places. So my 30s were very turbulent. I was moving constantly and I was constantly under stress. Sometimes taking my medication, sometimes not taking my medication, ending up in and out of mental hospitals, um, really until I turned 40. And then I started pulling myself together. Um, and I am where I am now. I'm in an apartment, I'm taking my meds. Um, so that's pretty much a summary of what I went through during my 20s and 30s and how I dealt with things. When I started turning 40, I started to take my daily program a little bit more seriously, got a new therapist, new psychiatrist, and have been fairly stable since then, although I've spent a lot of time in and out of mental hospitals, both in my 40s and 50s. I've even had electroshock treatments um, on several different occasions over the past 20, 30 years. I've had electroshock treatments, and they still do them in Rochester, New York at the University of Rochester, and they also still do them at Rochester General Hospital. So I had ECT, as it's called, electroconvulsive therapy. I had that done at Rochester General Hospital, as well as the University of Rochester Strong Memorial Hospital. That's how I dealt with things when I was in my 20s and 30s. Like, comment, share, subscribe. Um, Press the notification bells if you want to know when I put out new videos. And if you really want to help my channel, share my videos on social media.